official and adopt some minutes.
Sure. Looks like there's a few people still kind of popping in, so let's just
Give
give
it a
it
sec.
yep. And I know it's not possible for everyone, but the more we can turn our cameras on, the better it is to kind of connect with one another. So if you can share your camera, there's Jean. I know not everyone's up for that, but it would be greatly appreciated. So thank you for doing that for those of you that are turning on your cameras. I think we might be good here. All right.
Cool. I will share the presentation.
Yeah. There you go. That'll help me out. I should have it available, but I've only got one screen, so I'm limited. There we go.
And then we
So I know. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the summary, the minutes from our May meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Can I second?
Yes.
I'll second. Okay, we've got a second. So we're good. We approved our meeting minutes.
Cool. With that, we'll turn it over to Sam O'Connell to give, kick off our discussion on the anti-displacement working group. And kind of before we get into it, she has a little bit of a project update as well.
Thanks, Sophia, and thanks everybody. Good evening, Sam O'Connell from the Met Council. So yes, I would definitely, we're gonna walk through some of the information on the anti-displacement working group, update kind of the request for proposals that was in your packet, talk a little bit about that tonight, and solicit some of your feedback that you might have on that. But before we begin, just wanted to share with the group what we think is actually really good news, and it occurred on Friday. And the Federal Transit Administration released its kind of annual report on projects like ours. So they're kind of the light rail and bus rapid transit and kind of heavy rail projects that the nation is investing in. This is part of the current administration's investment. So this really kind of starts the talking point of where do we begin to invest in our projects. And so that came out on Friday. Minnesota actually did very well. There's 3 projects in Minnesota that they identified. The Gold Line, which is the bus rapid transit from St. Paul up to Woodbury. There's also a project in Rochester, Minnesota that was identified. And then also our Blue Line extension. One note on the Blue Line extension is that as we see this as a positive, that we kind of held our space in line, if you will, even though we're transitioning and looking at serving, new communities and neighborhoods. With our discussion here is they classified us as under review. So although we are still in new starts engineering, we are under review. So it's actually a new classification. It's the first time it's been identified in kind of the federal queue, if you will. And what that means is basically they kind of like took our information that we had, sort of previous budget, financial ratings, all of that, which we basically, our project rating was medium high. So they basically kind of wiped that and then just sort of put placeholders and literally to be determined until we get through kind of the process that we're in to help identify a community supported alignment that can move on into the federal process and environmental documentation. So very good news for us to hear that and see that we were represented well in this report. Just to give you a little bit of background, when we had the very same conversations with our federal transit partners back in last year, back at the end of the year, I think with that previous administration, they had even suggested that maybe we're not eligible to stay in the queue, to stay in the program and kind of move back, if you will, So we're very happy to see that not only did we retain our spot, we're exactly where we kind of were before in the engineering phase. So just wanted to share that with you in case some folks happen to come across that over the weekend or during the week. So I'll just stop there and to see if there's any questions about that. So I see Adam asked, is there a budget limit? Well, there's no limit. We know that in some of the federal projects, there are projects that are over 12 billion, 14 billion. It's really kind of up to the locals to decide what project makes the most sense. We are actively seeking, as part of this project, just like we did with the previous alignment, federal participation. You actually get more points, if you will, if you seek less federal participation. So the more local dollars that you put into a project actually begins to rank higher. So there isn't a budget limit, but again, we have to do what makes sense. Our previous budget was $1.53 billion. So as we go through our technical analysis and our continued work, we'll understand kind of where we are from that 1.53, and then, you know, really it's about serving communities and really thinking about the future. So Catherine asks, are we maintaining the same timeline? Well, Catherine, if we were maintaining the same timeline, we would be open next year. So I would say that we are not maintaining the same timeline. What I will share with you, and I think folks understand this from our perspective here in the Twin Cities, is that the more that you can get things done, the quicker that you can do things, the better off you are. Time is not necessarily always on your side when it comes to these multi-billion-dollar projects, and things get to cost a little bit more. We've seen this now with our other projects. So although we would like to, we want to do this well, we want to do this correctly. We also are also aware that a new administration could also change the rules on us as well, which has happened before. So we want to always maintain competitiveness, and knowing the groundwork of the federal landscape is part of that.
That actually might feed into Jason's next question pretty well, in the sense that in previous guidance, you know, to the federal match was you know, it made it a certain way, right? You actually wanted to ask under 50%, but kind of seeing what kind of comes out in terms of new administration direction helps us kind of figure out our land and whatnot. And really want to emphasize, to Sam's point, you know, we have a lot of flexibility. The overall is putting together a project that's competitive. So kind of when we talk about our project goals and objectives and kind of those ratings, like how many people do we actually serve, what destinations do we reach, that helps us kind of justify the project in terms of a budget and all that kind of stuff to make us competitive and all of that. So that's why we do it a little bit.
Yeah. So Jason, you know, your question about will the current infrastructure bill negotiations impact the Blue Line project? It would, in the sense of how the capital investment grant program is administered. So if there are different benchmarks, to Sophia's point, that's what we are always working towards. So we'll continue to monitor that. We do have quarterly meetings with our Federal Transit Administration partners. Our region, they're actually headquartered in Chicago. So we meet with them quarterly and provide updates on where the project is, our technical analysis, what we're also hearing from community and through the engagement efforts. And so then that's an opportunity for them to kind of share any updates from the administration's perspective as well. Okay, unless there's any more questions, I'd be happy. We could talk about this all night. Believe you me, this region has so much experience with doing projects under different administrations with different combinations of things. But what we're really here is to talk about the Blue Line extension. So I'll transition to the anti-displacement working group update. So just to kind of set the table again, the conversation that we're having today really is an outcome of a lot of the community conversations that we've been having with neighborhood members, with business folks, even with policymakers about we really need to get a handle on the potential impacts of displacement and how can we get in front of it. So from our last conversation as a community advisory committee, as we looked at different, the example from Central Corridor, how can we put good mechanisms in place now so as we do these projects that do take a while to develop, make sure that we've got that structure in place to really help us support and be the best that we can and support community members, support residents, and support businesses through this process. So I just want to say, thanks for hanging in there with us. It's taking us a little time to kind of get this, but we want to get it right. It's very important because this is the first time we're doing this on a regional project like this. So what we're going to walk through is the request for proposals. So as we received, I think a lot of folks kind of nodding their head and understood that it shouldn't be led by the council. It shouldn't be led by Hennepin County or kind of our project partners. We really need to bring a third party in to kind of help us facilitate and navigate these conversations. So I'm going to walk through, and Jason, if we can maybe move to the next slide. So before we kind of get into a little bit of the details of the request for proposals, wanted to just talk a little bit about how we're going to bring somebody on. So this is a competitive proposal that would go out into the world, if you will, and we'll talk a little bit of how that will happen. But probably more importantly for us today is hearing from your perspective, like what makes this work important? What do we need to really make as priorities and spend a little bit more time in polishing this request for proposal so we're really focused on the issues at hand. So yesterday we did meet with the Business Advisory Committee and walked through the information that we'll walk through tonight. Again, working with you, and then also through Joan Van Holla and Hennepin County and the community engagement cohort, also giving an opportunity to hear from them on what's important. So we will also do this next week with the Corridor Management Committee. So those that also participate there, you'll hear it one more time. But again, our default is making sure everybody knows the work that we're proposing to do, how they can provide comments, and then sort of the next steps of getting that work out and finding a contractor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Gold, who will talk about the rest of the, I think we're calling this the Candyland game here. So go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks, Sam. Dan refers to it as the game of life. So last Friday, we sent out the materials of the RFP for stakeholders to review, and we presented them yesterday to the BAC and then to you tonight. And this afternoon, we presented them to the community engagement cohort. We'll then present, like Sam said, to the CMC on the 10th of June. And then we're hoping that everybody can provide their comments to us and get those into us by June 24th. And then we would expediently put it out into the public for solicitation on June 28th. We want to be thoughtful that we have enough time for people to put together good proposals. And that being said, we'll have a pre-bid meeting on July 12th. And proposals due then on July 27th. After that time, we will look at evaluating those proposals and having a decision potentially July 29th through the 30th. And then we kind of get into these next three spaces, if you will, from August 3rd for board action at the Hennepin County Board. We will communicate on August 3rd. Then the following week, August 10th, it'll go to Public Works Committee. And finally, on August 17th, it will go to board for approval. During that time, we won't stand still. We will be looking at having preliminary negotiations with the vendor, in addition to navigating our internal contracting process. so that when board approval is made on August 17th, we can go ahead and send that contract out to the vendor for execution. It'll probably take until August 26th, I'm estimating, for final contract execution through Hennepin County. And that likely brings us to early September for a vendor onboarding and initial meeting calendars, or being calendared. So that's kind of the timeline of how this process will look for the RFP.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. So again, the timeline provides an opportunity for our community members to give us feedback and making sure that we're hitting exactly what we need to be hitting so we can move this forward and then kind of bring somebody or somebody's, a collection of folks who do this work on to support it. So I'm just going to begin to walk through the request for proposals again. The document talks a little bit more about the purpose, again, of the working group and really their focus. So we're going to talk more about the role of the consultant today. So this contractor, the consultant, is responsible for convening the working group, for facilitating the work of the working group and managing that work in the space of anti-displacement policy. And again, our goal here is to develop actionable recommendations that whether you're a city or Hennepin County or a Met Council or either state agency that can take back and begin to really work into how we can dig deeper and from that perspective of community actually get through policies and changes that makes anti-displacement something that we don't see anymore, or displacement, excuse me, that we don't see anymore. And so it's going to take us really good work to do that. So what we're looking for in terms of that consultant role is that not only are they obviously skilled in facilitating and convening this work and managing this work, but they're also a subject matter expert. So someone or organization that has experience in anti-displacement and gentrification and is bringing that knowledge into the conversation and into the work. The role that we're also asking for is that this consultant is going to work very closely not only with the project management team, but also be sharing their work and looking for your ideas and your feedback through the Business Advisory Committee, from the Community Advisory Committee, from the Community Engagement Cohort and Corridor Management Committee, as well as community members. So we will work together on engaging community members and the Community Work Steering Committee for Hennepin County as well. Next slide, please. So as you said, that in terms of who is doing this work, it can be an individual or it could be a collection of small team organizations coming together. We're really letting the process be as creative as possible in terms of how these proposals come together. But there are some preferred qualifications that we are looking for, and this is really a reflection of what we're hearing as folks are talking about this and sharing their thoughts with us. And again, demonstrated expertise and knowledge and effectiveness of displacement, of housing affordability, economic development, and community wealth building strategies. Good news about that is there are a lot of organizations locally that are doing that work, and we want to bring that into the conversation. Also that they have experience in working in local communities and are invested in this and supporting communities. We want to make sure that they have passion for this as well. And also are able to pivot and navigate and kind of facilitate state and local agencies and community partners, right? I mean, that's just sort of speak to say, help us cut through the red tape when we need to get through the red tape. And a background in some of these complex infrastructure projects is also very helpful. Again, these are preferred. You don't necessarily have to have this, but it's something that we're looking for. Probably more importantly, is able to build trust with communities that are vulnerable to displacement. This is key. And then also through our engagement, very much like we're learning, community events, right, have taken over, but how are we still bringing meaningful work to communities when when we are lucky to have their time, both in person and also virtually as well. Next slide, please. So we are suggesting that the preferred consultant has a minimum of 10 years of experience, really kind of doing this work locally and local policy development and implementation. Again, kind of those three big areas in housing, economic development, racial equity, and or cultural competency. We think those are kind of key pieces. If there's other areas that you feel that this consultant should have a deep knowledge and deeply seeped in, please let us know so we can add that as well. And this can be a combination of both work already done, excuse me, work already done, and also education as well in terms of the 10 years. Moving on to the next slide, the RFP really outlines kind of the tasks that we broke up into 7 areas. So really that first one is the project management, and that's really developing a work plan that says this is how the work of the working group is going to do. So it has the scope of their work and their milestones, and that's something that we're going to use pretty quickly to communicate to our community members and committees to say this is really what we should anticipate in terms of their good work, and basically also providing the status reports on how is that going, so we're making sure we're achievable. And if we need to pivot, let's talk about how we need to pivot if there's an emerging issue that we need to address. So really kind of pulling that project plan in there. So the other piece that's a strong element of the request for proposals is the working group facilitation, and basically looking for a contractor consultant who can work in and really get the working group to start working right away, kind of bring that together. So how can we identify some early wins in terms of activities that the working group can do and focus in on that's going to produce some results quickly, that could be measurable. How are they going to come to decision making and consensus as well? So again, spending some time on that, and also again, kind of continuing to work on the working plan, the work plan for the work of this group. Task 3 is something where all of our kind of community groups, the council, Hennepin County, our city partners can add, which is sort of that market analysis and basically kind of that qualitative and quantitative data that helps us understand where are the gaps, particularly in housing and economic development, really kind of bringing demographics in here, really seeped in that work. So we do have some new data sets that the council has developed that is focused in on equity and bringing that work in and really understand where do we have some vulnerability about there. And then on the flip side of that is where some opportunities as well. Task 4 is bringing in where are we with our existing policies? Why are they working or not working, and beginning to bring that knowledge and that understanding into the working group as well. So it's a policy audit, I would say program audit as well. And this is the areas that we can begin to focus in to see where we can affect some change and see the results that we desire. That case study review is both locally and nationally. We're not the only communities that are, kind of wrestling with some of these larger issues, and how can we bring that into the conversation? So we're looking to have that as knowledge. So the community consultation is really kind of to work with our larger communities and share this information and receive feedback and bring that back into the conversation as well. So we clearly wanted to identify that as a task, because this group is not going to be working in a bubble. We want them to actually be in community. And then ultimately coming together and produce the recommendations and implementation plan that begins to help us move forward, right? And when task 6 comes together, nobody should be surprised, because you've been engaged, you've had everybody's had an opportunity to see, hear, feel, kind of really understand where this is going. So task 6 is really the culmination of that work. Just wanted to see before we move on if there's any questions on any of that before we move on. Okay, just have a couple more slides and looking for your feedback and thoughts as we're sharing this with you. So again, kind of a lesson learned with some of this work related to the project. We need to be expansive in our communications so more of our networks know that this work is being put out for folks to participate in. So we are going to be developing a plan, a communications plan. So we'll be engaging everyone around here. So you will be hearing about it. You'll know when the RFP is available, and we'll also be developing draft content so you can share with your networks. So get them in your community newsletters, in your work newsletters, your organizations as well. We'll link folks back to how they can access the request for proposal and all the additional information on how to do this. We'll also be using our community, our cohort, so the engagement group, really using social media to get this out as well. The larger net that we can cast, the better we feel that we'll get for proposals. So we'll have conversation here tonight, but just wanted, if folks had to leave, if you do have comments about the draft RFP, go ahead and just email me directly. I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat as well. What we'd like to do is collect all of those comments, pull that together, produce a final request for proposal, and that would go, as Kathy said, out on June 28th.
Sam, was you going to be answering questions, or do you want this just in an email to you?
Yeah, either way, I think, Jason, if it's okay for us to maybe handle, answer some of those questions tonight, and then if we, I know we need to move on to some other agenda items, but then we can please follow up with me via email.
And we do have plenty of time for discussion right now as well. So I can stop sharing for a sec. We do need to select somebody to kind of be part of the review, but so that we can have a discussion, I'm going to stop sharing for a sec and kind of turn it over to the committee to give Sam any initial thoughts about the proposal.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing really quick. We want to have a conversation and a discussion about this. So that's part of why we have extra time tonight, is that this isn't going to happen in our normal. We sort of thought this was going to take a little bit more time than just the normal conversation because it's a big topic. But if we need to continue this conversation, we can do that. The other thing that I guess in this conversation and discussion and questions and all that, at the end of the day, like, it would be great if we could come up with a couple, if there are concerns or lingering things or whatever we want to take to the CMC, the Corridor Management Committee. I think that would be great, because if, usually on those calls, I just share a quick update on, what we discussed, where things are at and what we're doing. I think it would be good to have, like, here's this very specific feedback. So let's let this conversation get going, and we'll see where it ends up. But I think at the end of this call, if we're not in a place where we have, here's like, 3 or 4 bullet points or maybe a few more of where we specifically want to bring up concerns with, or discussion points or questions or whatever it is to the CMC, then we should probably, and we do have maybe an option on the 16th to have that follow-up conversation. So we just want to make sure, I kind of want to try to distill this conversation into some things that I can take specifically to the CMC. But at the same time, I don't want to limit the conversation. So just let's think of that as the end goal, but have our conversation as we will, and hopefully we have plenty of time to get through it.
Pretty basic questions. I'm still trying to understand what your goal is. Is this to eliminate displacement altogether? I mean, is there a benchmark, a percentage? What is the deliverable from this RFP working group?
Yeah, Catherine, it would be ideal if we could eliminate displacement. I think what this RFP is allowing us to do is get into the work and bring together the voices and the data and the information that we need to actually begin to think about what exists today in those structures that contribute to displacement, and how can we eliminate that, particularly as we look at the blue line extension impacting our communities, both in a good way and potentially in a way that this is not exactly how communities maybe wanted to see themselves grow, or want to ensure that there are certain ways that the community has already identified what that growth looks like, if it's and who is actually benefiting from that growth and that wealth building in communities. So what we're hearing from folks is that they would like for that to continue to be local, and folks who live here and who are taking their time to participate in this project, in this process, that they should also benefit from this project, not only as a rider, but if they have a business, that they have the tools that allows them to stay, not only when the project is up and running, but through construction. So
Well,
go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was going to say, as you know, I work with a lot of youth organizations, so we have some informal queries, and it seems that the under 40 group, and I'll just use 40 as a number, has a totally different feeling about what we're calling displacement. So they don't seem to be as worried about it as we are. So I wanted to make sure that whoever this group that you hire be looking at some of the immediate issues of and I'm just labeling them the over 40 group, as opposed to when this line really comes into production for the under 40 group, who have a totally different approach to gentrification and displacement. So whoever responds or gets the job for the RFP, just want to make sure that they are looking at it from two different lenses, or however many lenses need to be looked at, and not just looking at one particular group.
Catherine, I appreciate that, and that's totally intent, and it's the reason why we don't actually define anti-displacement, because that is part of the work of the working group to come in, because there are many different lenses in terms of displacement, whether it's business, residential, there's cultural displacement. And so we want the working group to get into exactly those deep conversations, not with a preset of what we think it is, because this will involve more voices coming into it.
So we don't have a percentage that we're looking for or anything like that. So how are you going to define success?
So that is actually part of what we're asking the working group to come together, with community members, with agency members, with folks that have deep interest in this, and our education experts to kind of come in and say what makes sense for the communities that Blue Line is going to be serving. What actually makes sense. So part of that is bringing that data to the conversation. Sort of what accounts for natural growth, what accounts for sort of natural turnover in communities, but then more importantly, how do we keep folks in our communities and not only, just experience again the impacts of light rail in terms of living through construction, but continually to build community wealth. So again, the work of the working group is going to be done that way. And Catherine, I would offer up again, what we feel is key is that work is coming back to the Community Advisory Committee, right? So they are sharing that information with everybody around the virtual table, and then hearing your thoughts and conversations, and then bringing that work back in.
I'd also offer the slides are very summary level. So the full RFP is in your packet, and I think it's helpful just to cruise through it real quick if you want to, on your personal screens, kind of pull it up and work through it, because I think for as staff, we're even it's kind of like, does this proposal feel right? Like, is there support for the direction that we're going and how we have it laid out? And kind of like, is there pieces that are missing, right, that you want included, and kind of those comment level type things? And maybe.
Oh, sorry, Sophia. I was just going to notice that Adam has a question here. This person group will have some local connection to the area, not an out-of-state option, correct? They could be out of state, but it's why, again, we've identified sort of those preferred qualifications is that they have at least 10 years experience working locally, working with our community members in the areas of anti-displacement and gentrification. So they could propose, a team from, I'll just say San Francisco comes in and they'll see this and they could propose. That's really why, as Sophia alluded to tonight, we would love to have a representative from the Community Advisory Committee here to also participate in the review of those proposals and the selection of a contractor for that, so we can have those conversations and with that knowledge. So it could be any certain national, but we have those preferred qualifications. Take a look. If you feel like we need to be stronger in that language, that's fine. We can do that as well.
Thank you for that. I just get worried we hire someone from out of state that doesn't understand our dynamic in our state and use a San Francisco solution to a Minnesota issue. I think that happens a lot. So I just get worried about that. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, we're not looking for cookie cutter, right? And just find and replace. That's not going to work for us. So
Are you going to make a requirement that this group pay community members who they engage for information?
We have not made that a requirement, Catherine, but thank you for raising that, and we can bring that back and see how we can get community engagement support. We do see this work working alongside with the work that Sophia and Joan Van Holle does. And so again, kind of with the 14 community groups that we're working with as well. But I appreciate that comment.
So I guess, I was just going to say really quick. I mean, I know Sophia is asking everyone to pull up the actual RFP to look at it. Does everyone see that in their packet, or has anyone looked at that yet?
I grazed it. I can't do both. I can't be here and pull it up. Yeah.
Yep. I just want to make sure, like, I know sometimes the attachments, like if you don't see it, you're just counting on like what we're doing here in the meeting. But have most people looked at it, or can at least access it?
Is that the one attached to the email, Sophia, with 59 pages?
Yeah, it's the one that has the minutes and this presentation, but also like includes the RFP in kind of the middle from like pages
8 through probably 12,
something like
14 through 14.
Because
I had some questions on page 46, but that we can do that later.
So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as it relates to the RFP, what Sam just went through is a good overview of the goals we're trying to accomplish on hiring a consultant to lead the working group. But if there are specific details in the RFP that someone has an issue with, or if we want to take a few minutes while we're on this call to like skim through it and look, we could do that too. But I just want to make sure everybody has it, because if you're having trouble finding it, that's something we want to help you with as well.
Thank you for that, Jason. And we could just resend out the RFP too, so folks have that in the top of their email, so you don't have to go through. Catherine said 59 pages, which the majority of that's actually tonight's presentation, so we understand. And our apologies, it did come out right before the holiday weekend, so we know folks had plans and were probably living their life, right, and haven't had an opportunity to go all the way through it. The good news about it is we're having our discussion tonight. Hopefully that gives you the opportunity to take a look at it. We provide a little bit more of that background. All I would do have any comments, just go ahead and just email me, even if it's like IP, and let's connect. And I'm happy to connect with you and talk about some of your thoughts and ideas. Or if you just have like, I think this is, this task needs to be spelled out a little bit more, and here's my idea on that, go ahead and email that to me. And so we're going to be taking all of this in. So Jason, to your point, we can, spend a little bit more time if folks have any more questions, but just know that tonight isn't the only night that you have the opportunity to kind of share your thoughts with us.
I guess committee chair, is it if there's any other just questions or comments generally about the direction? Maybe there's not a lot of specifics on the proposal, but kind of the direction we're going. You were hoping to have just a couple of things that you could kind of report to the CMC from the committee about kind of anti-displacement. So just want to kind of check in, and then otherwise we can move, if we're ready to move on to the next topic, can pull up the presentation. We can talk about selecting a representative to help review the RFPs.
So I know in our last meeting, we had a healthy discussion about what does anti-displacement mean? What do we think is important in this working group? And it was kind of like, we had a big discussion at the end of the meeting. And so if there's leftover from that conversation, I know it's been a month, or based on, what Sam has presented, or if you're having a chance to look through the actual RFP, I mean, this kind of came up last time, but do we think that the project team is heading directionally in the right place? Or is this like way off or a good start? Because at some point, in July or whatever, this RFP is going to go out, and we're going to get further down the road of having someone represent the project and build this working group to come up with some answers. So this is our time to actually give feedback and share some of that with, hopefully we'll have some details to give to the CMC. And if not, and we feel like, hey, this is amazing, we're doing great work here, then that might just be the gist of it. But I feel like there's lots of opinions, so we need people to share them.
This is Corey Funk. I'd just like to ask a question about this anti-displacement. Has this been used in the past for the other light rail programs? Was it done for Southwest? What's the history of this consultant with the project?
So yeah, Corey, I appreciate that question, because this is sort of new ground. This is new territory that we are covering with the Blue Line extension with this project. So some work like this was done with the Central Corridor, with the Central Corridors Funding Collaborative. We talked a little bit about their work, I think, a couple meetings ago. But this is really the first time that we are starting this early with a project, and having these conversations help inform how we move forward, and embed it, as, if you will, with not only the work that our advisory committees are doing, but also us as the project team and the technical work as well, because we see that both kind of feed each other, in terms of this. So this is the first time that we are bringing on a contractor to assist us with this work. What gives us comfort is knowing that not only are we doing this for the first time, but we also know that a lot of community members, a lot of organizations, community organizations, have also done a lot of this work. Blue Line Coalition, for example, has developed a scorecard that they're developing about how do you begin to, kind of Catherine's question, sort of begin to talk about benchmarking about anti-displacement and affordable housing and community-led development, and what that actually looks like. So although we're new to this in a certain way, in this structure and form, we are leaning into a lot of the good work that has already come together from locally.
So I don't want to interrupt the gentleman if he's got more.
This is the second part of my question, I guess, is I'm familiar with the drafting of these type of proposals just with my commission work in the city of Brooklyn Park and such. But the question, I guess, is related to the deliverables, the tasks. There's really no timeline assigned to this. So, and the fact that it's a 12 to 18 month agreement kind of leaves that open to the consultant to fill in that timeline. Is that what I'm seeing?
That's absolutely right, Corey. We didn't want to be super prescriptive. We want to allow for creativity. We want proposers to bring their best creative proposal. And again, if you have, and I'll admit this, I'm kind of a career public servant, and really dictating that, we might lose some of the creativity. So we really want our proposals to be very strong and creative, and especially if we're looking at contractors or consultants or folks who have done this work locally, to bring that experience and help inform their proposals as well. So that is what we are asking them as part of their work plan, is to pull that together to develop that schedule, the milestones for those deliverables, and that's something that we'll be looking at then as a selection committee.
So Sam,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna put on my community hat for a second, and this looks just like another. We're gathering information, but we have no actionable items or things to do, and that's the way the community may be looking at it initially as well. So to me, this is somewhat important, but the auxiliary services and providing actionable things, funding, sources of information, places for people to go is going to be more important than these people just gathering some nice little information.
Mm-hmm.
So where is that fitting into this RFP? If I'm Joe with a barbershop and I need additional business acumen, I need funding, I need training, I need to know how to hire more staff, I need all of those auxiliary services to help me maintain my business. Where is that fit, other than you've gathered a lot of nice information?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, Catherine, what I hear from that is that that's the importance of leaning into the what people are already sharing with us. That's important to them. And, you know, how do we get those services? How do we get connected? Although this work continues, this doesn't mean we are not also beginning to connect and formulate a little bit between what resources do exist. So the city, Hennepin County, and the Met Council, right? We still have these things. So how can we begin to pull those together and support community members and businesses as we do this? What we're asking, what the difference here is, like, what are the best tools? And if we need to change those tools up a little bit or modify, this is providing that opportunity for us to do it. What I also hear in your question is, where's the commitment from potentially our policymakers, from our organizations, that even when at the end of this work, where does this sit? Who actually kind of makes that? And that is our continued conversation. I can speak from the council, and I think Kathy can talk about from Hennepin County. We're hearing this. This is a commitment. This meets our some of the work that we want to do in equity and move forward with it. I would also say, Catherine, we still need to get there in terms of those conversations. The city is a huge partner in this as well. And so we need to make sure we're having those conversations, that we're influencing the right places so we can move the needle on it. So, so yes, it's sort of big policy on some pieces, but it's also, how can we make this more actionable from a community member's point of view too?
Right, and we need private industry. We need lenders. We need the banking community. We need a lot of things. So, to me, just having this RFP and this group filling out a lot of information, I don't see where the benefit is, the actionable items, the end result going out to the community. And I can tell you, folks are tired of answering questions. and doing the work of the consulting firm while they get paid and they come to us for the answers. So
Yep.
we're not doing that anymore.
Mhm.
So I just want to make sure that there are these resources available to the community after or during or even before, because they need help now positioning themselves for a lot of these federal programs that are available. So they need this kind of hand-holding or assistance now, not 12 to 18 months from now. They may be out of business.
I hear that, Catherine. I do. We hear that. The whole team hears that on how do we move forward in this work, but then support. So I'd like to come back with a better answer for you on that too.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
So I saw that
Okay.
Kathy. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
Nope, I just wanted to jump in and just kind of take a little opposite position if I could, Jason. You know, I think a lot of us have seen and heard about all the issues that are related to local businesses and community members and residents and such along the other corridor lines. And I see it firsthand in the Southwest area and how it affects the local businesses and the local people and the residents and even the people trying to use the amenities in the area. That I'm actually, you know, in great favor of this type of a new concept and something to try to head off those issues that you heard so much about during the Green Line, and you're hearing about sporadically here on the Southwest, but not in any greater detail. I think this is a good step forward, and that's me putting my community hat on.
Jason, Sam, Spread here. I think it's a both and. I mean, we keep trying to choose between what's going on. It's both and across the board. And I think we have to start to realize that there's the long-term policy ramifications that we can get into, but it's the short-term how. And I'll use a conversation I had not that long ago with a fellow community member who literally is like absolutely opposed to doing anything on Broadway because they believe that their shop is going to be inaccessible. And if we're able to find a way to get as to what Catherine was talking about, getting that information out to people sooner than later, giving them some support, but also letting them see the path forward on how this thing works from there, I think we will serve ourselves we will cut off a lot of headaches if we get to the both and. So how do we, I think to Catherine's point, how do we incorporate, that effort? Because again, what also will take place is that how many people do I have to talk to in order to get to the right answer? We need to have it in one location in order to make sure that it's effective and efficient, and also be able to serve equitable outcomes as well.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that comment, and I'm hearing that. It's ringing in my head. It's planted that seed on how we do that, and we'll have our team come back and talk a little bit more about this. And we hear that because that is exactly what we're hearing from community members. It's like I want to be more excited for this project, but I also don't know exactly what the future holds for me and how I'm going to be impacted. So help me with that. So I hear that. I hear that.
And I guess that's a question that Brett, you bring up a great point, and I that kind of leads me to my question, which is, from the way that I'm reading the RFP, this resource is someone that's leading this group that will help that group come to conclusions and help, and where does that focus need to be, and what kind of programs and all of that. But to Brett's point, like, what about the stuff like right when this gets started, and will this resource be someone that the community can also turn to? It doesn't really feel like the way that the RFP is written, that it seems like it's more we're going to, over a period of time, convene the community and have a working group, and at the end of that time, we're going to have some decisions made, and that's going to help with all of this anti-displacement, which I agree with Corey. Like, that's a great idea to have. We want that. But is there any way to also have this as a resource of, hey, this is the person to go to, since we're in the we're in the course of coming up with these decisions, hey, I have this like immediate feedback that I need to know what's going on. Is this resource going to be that as well? And maybe not, but it would be worth considering to have that. Or is like the project team the resource for that? Or what is it, how does that work?
Right. No, Jason, I get it. And, to your point and Brett's point here, it's like, what do we do now? What do we do today, right? What do we do while this consultant is being selected and being brought on, and the advisory, I keep calling them an advisory committee, but they are a working group. When the working group comes together, and I think that's the task for the project management team that exists today to come back and share that with you. And how do we bridge that gap?
Because I agree I think that the overall work is good. And that's where, like I was kind of asking last time, it's like, I think directionally, this is great. Like, this is something we definitely should have done in the past. And I'm glad we're thinking about it now and doing this. But at the same time, it's like, how do you get the value out of what that's going to be and what that working group is going to deliver, but like in a shorter time frame for businesses, community members, people that are concerned like right now about like something that we haven't even started building the project yet, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's not easy, but it's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah.
So Sam, in your selection process, I guess that's you might be loaded toward a local group so that they can provide the ongoing support that Jason just talked about.
As I think as the evaluation panel, Catherine, comes together, that is something that they can have a discussion. We can't dictate where the contractors come from in the RFP, because we are hoping to make this effort federally eligible. So when you have federal dollars going in or matches a project like this, you can't say that it can only be from contractors in a certain area. But to your point, we can make that language stronger about the preferred qualifications of being more deeply seated in local community experiences.
Or after their deliverables, can they stay around for a minute or two?
Yeah, and Kathy Gold, she actually had a really good idea that this is something that we want to keep open with the because this group that will be led by this consultant, they're going to develop a lot of knowledge, and we don't want that knowledge to walk out the door, right? We just don't want to be handed a book and then they walk away. So we really want to retain that possibility of keeping them on and moving forward. And very much like what Jason and Brett have said, maybe the number one thing is that we need that sort of one-stop shopping resource center that connects folks to the resources that exist today, while we are also working on changing things to make it work better for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So maybe you can form that group that will partner with this RFP group that will be resident and will have a building or funding or whatever to be that one-stop shop that will take over the deliverables from whatever group you decide based on your RFP.
So, again, this is the benefit of having these conversations. And Jason, appreciate, the time that we're taking to do, because this is exactly what we're sharing tonight, and how we're talking about this is how we want the working group to come to the CAC and exactly have these conversations too. So they're hearing it directly. They're hearing it, so they're not getting the SAM filter, the Sophia filter. They're hearing it directly to the communities and bringing that information forward. To that point, Catherine, yes, we do have an ask of the CAC. We would love to have a representative participate on the evaluation panel. So it is a bit of, you would review the proposals. You would score them, meet with the evaluation panel team. So we're thinking probably like maybe about 6 or 7 people that would have also a BAC representative, for which Felicia Perry volunteered yesterday morning to participate on the evaluation panel. And if we need to conduct interviews with any of the proposers, that you would participate in that. And probably the other thing is, because we're just all connected in a lot of the work we do, is that you should also not have a conflict of interest with any of the proposers or the organizations that they're associated with. So Jason, I would just offer that up as one of the takeaways, if we could, in terms of our discussion tonight, and something that can also be reported to corridor management committee too.
Yep, and I think before we get there, I just want to make sure I saw that Kathy Frazier had her hand raised. And Kathy, if you had a question or you wanted to make a comment, let us know. And if there's anyone else as we're going through this, if you want to speak, if you have something you want to contribute, we want to hear it.
Yeah, I'll just, a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I'll just add a couple more things.
Thank you.
I'm going to look over the proposal a little bit more. I think there's some of the qualifications need to be, highlighted a little bit more. The other thing I wanted to ask was around, once this group is convened, what does that vetting process looks like to actually include all the different members of this that's going to make up this group?
So thank you for that, Kathy. That is something that we'll have to continue to work on. We've heard some thoughts from a few folks on who should be around that working group table, if you will. We've got sort of placeholders last time we met to talk a little bit about that, but we do need to come to a definition of what that is. We do also feel like there's an opportunity for the contractor to help us shape that, to make sure voices that are representative of the community, as well as who can actually make change, is around, are around that table as well. So I think probably what we'll propose is that here's sort of the minimum that we know for sure in terms of either organizations or interests. And Catherine, you talked about the developer community, right? Like, we need to have them at the table too, because they're part of the solution. So we also need a manageable number, right? Because this is a group that is going to meet over the course of 12 to 18 months, maybe even a couple of meetings a month. So we also need to have a manageable number that is sustainable over this time, because we are asking a lot, but we should be asking a lot too. So to just answer that, Kathy, I think that might just take a couple of steps for us to get to that right combination that's around the table.
Great, thanks.
Do you have any other comments or questions before we, or if anybody wants to volunteer to be the CAC representative on the RFP evaluation panel, that would be great too.
I would love to.
Was that Kathy?
Yes.
Okay. Do we go, Sophia, you tell me if we go through an official, do we need to approve it, or if she wants to do it, then that's fine.
It was to solicit interest, and if we have somebody that is ready to do it and the committee is cool with that, I think we're all set.
If I could maybe, Jason, just also suggest maybe there's an alternate, just in case if something should, circumstances might be that we do have a primary, that we would also have somebody who'd be willing to step in, especially since you don't know who the proposers are, right? And so there just might be a potential conflict of interest. So I would just also suggest if maybe the committee would be interested in entertaining an alternate to serve as well.
I think that's great. Does anyone want to be a backup in case Kathy can't make a meeting, or there turns out, however unlikely, that there's a conflict of interest?
If you don't mind having two people from Brooklyn Park, I'll do the alternate for Corey Funk.
I personally don't have an issue with that. If someone on the committee has a problem with that, let us know, but I think that should work. We really want to make sure that we have the CAC represented in this evaluation panel. So I think if anybody dissents or is not or is opposed to that idea, let us know. But I think it should be okay.
I'll put a word out of just concern and caution, I guess. Most of the issues that we're talking about are going to affect Zone 3, which is North Minneapolis, to be blunt. So
Yes.
how can we figure out how to have somebody from the community? I already have a clear understanding that I'll probably have a conflict, so I won't be able to step into that process. And
Okay.
some of the people that I've shared with it, but I think somebody from Zone 3 should be considered as well.
That's a fair point. Is there anyone that's in Minneapolis that or in Zone 3? And honestly, if we have our representative and an alternate, and then somebody thinks about it and comes back and says, okay, you know what, I would want to be involved, maybe we can switch that out, because it's going to be a little bit before we start even getting these proposals. Like that could.
Right.
I will offer to the representative from the BAC is from Zone 3. So if that helps at all. And sorry, it sounded like I talked over somebody.
Yeah, sorry, this is Peggy Sue from Ward 4. I'd be willing to help as well.
Okay.
Okay. So, Corey, if it's okay with you, I think Kathy's going to be from Brooklyn Park, and then we'll have Peggy Sue from Minneapolis that will be the alternate. So we'll just make sure we have that coverage just in case. Is that okay? Is he nodding yes? I can only see like a couple people at a time. Thanks, Corey.
Yep. I'm
Thanks.
fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I guess, do we want to, it sounds like we've made some decisions on that. Kathy Frazier is going to be the CAC representative, and Peggy Sue will be the alternate. Do we want to move on to the next item in the agenda? And then again, we have extra time tonight. So if somebody is looking through the RFP or has something that they want to bring up, that's totally fine. We can come back and revisit that, but let's go through the rest of the conversation. And I think we can kind of end on like, here's what I'm gonna take to the CMC, and kind of just bring back some of those points, and we can continue the conversation if needed there. So on to the next bullet point. And thanks everyone for the discussion.
Yeah, it's a big topic that has a lot of time, and glad that we're kind of coalescing around the proposal and just getting into some of the specifics. So with that, I'm just going to highlight a little bit about what we've been doing in March through May. So we've been asking the community a lot of things, and to use Sam's words, engagement is both a necessity and also an extractive process. So we want to, as we're extracting feedback, we want to reflect that back and pull it into the project. So I'm just going to walk us through real quick some of what we've been hearing and whatnot. So just to kind of start out with, we've been a whole lot of places this last month, and through just kind of getting throughout the corridor, trying to reach different groups and get it into these conversations. And with that, kind of to frame where we are. So we'll have a full report in July that kind of details all the feedback that we've heard through the past months, but also wanting to acknowledge that we've been incorporating what we've been hearing on an ongoing basis to help shape the project. And the formation of the anti-displacement working group and the draft RFP was something that came from this group, from others. And initially, especially, I think we began discussions about talking about specifically construction and construction impacts, but then also hearing about indirect displacement. So things that the community brought up are kind of why the project team has been moving forward in certain ways and trying to be responsive, as well as some of the engineering that we've been doing as people have pulled things together. you'll kind of see in through the presentation, even in Nick's section, that we're reflecting some of the things that we've heard in our engagement efforts. And so today is a preview. We'll obviously have more things kind of together formally. And also want to acknowledge that the many of you, as well as the community engagement cohort, has really helped the robustness of our engagement efforts in terms of receiving responses and connecting with folks. So just some quick summary statistics. So through March through May, and it really kind of picked up because March was just kind of like release of information and getting things scheduled, and May was a very busy month. So kind of throughout those months, we've attended project staff and cohort members have attended over 60 events, reaching over 2,000 people at those activities. We've had about 1,600 responses to the survey, and there's still some paper surveys that the cohort did that are still being tabulated and will be added to these numbers. We also had about 500 comments on the interactive map, and just about 23 comments where people were like, I don't want to do your interactive map or your survey. I just want to email you my thoughts exactly. And so 23 kind of official comments. Also, over these last 3 months, we've gotten basically hundreds of questions, or either through email or phone calls, with people wanting just to kind of discuss project details. And so just kind of, ongoing conversation. To kind of ground us a little bit in what did we ask? What have we been talking about? So as we've shown the kind of the lines on the map, thinking about site-specific issues and opportunities that the staff should be aware of as we begin design. One of the big question was, hey, we're proposing routes. Are these right? Are we missing anything? And people responded to that. We asked specifically about the project goals, and those responses will help us shape our full set of evaluation criteria. We've already started to pull that in, and we have more to do. And we heard a little bit about people's early design preferences and what they want to see. And that includes potential station locations, which was Catherine's question about a bubble map that we're showing a bit later. So those are what folks responded to and began the conversation with us. So I'll break it down a little bit in terms of forums that we heard from folks. And one was the interactive map. And basically the 3 main questions that people could place a comment category on was an issue, an opportunity, or a desired station location. And people could either comment on kind of the overall area map or drill into a specific location. And so these are just some of the kind of high level results from that. A lot of folks commented on the overall map, as well as drilling into area 3 in particular and the route options there. Lot of feedback on desired station locations and kind of combination of opportunities and issues identified. We, kind of drilling into that, both in conversations and in the survey, kind of what are these site-specific things that people are wondering about? And location specific or just in general conversation through events. And some of the things that really kind of came to the forefront, and ironically we talked about some of them tonight just a minute ago, but what business support during construction. We heard it basically in all forums received, and especially in conversations and at events, is folks want to know as we get through construction, whether it's direct impacts or indirect impacts, how does it work for them? How do they get through it? And all that kind of stuff. And then kind of to the small businesses, those opportunities to build wealth, to leverage investment, to make it work for folks, and specifically supporting Black-owned businesses and Northside developers actually are currently working in the community to achieve development goals. We continue to hear, and it's always been a theme, kind of those desired destinations and community assets, things that people really wanted to make sure that we did not mess with. And another major theme is just, I think folks are, as we think about adding LRT, I think folks are thinking about parking, and then overall, this was both to 81 in West Broadway in Lowry. It's just pedestrian access and how that works. So pedestrian access was a piece that kind of came out throughout the corridor. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Area 3, but just also wanted to drill into Area 2 a little bit and kind of piggybacking off of that last comment with pedestrian access. So in Area 1, we asked about kind of design considerations, and while we also asked for missing options, you know, a lot of folks kind of focusing in on Bottineau Boulevard, County Road 81, and access, and just kind of like how would bikes connect to stations, if there was any room for improvement, your lighting, your crossings, your kind of just overall safety. In portions of County Road 81, there's landscaping, but even just thinking about that around stations and whatnot. And then, you know, wanting traffic to still flow. So we heard about that as well. In terms of the route validation, so did we miss anything? I would say basically that we heard support and concern on all the routes presented, right? There's a little bit of, you really want to see LRT, really excited, give us more information, tell us more about it, help us walk us through this a little bit. And again, the kind of the themes of construction and just kind of general placement were the often the most cited things. Like just tell me what you're doing, give me more information, make the world a little bit more known. And through the survey, you know, in public meetings and emails, kind of, you know, you have people reaching out about both Lowry and West Broadway, but to kind of, and it's, you know, that it's caveat, right? We didn't talk to everybody, so it's just kind of a sample of people. But approximately 100 people expressed, or sorry, 1,000 people expressed support of West Broadway, and about 500 in terms of Lowry. And so, oops, went the wrong way. In terms of how that broke down in the survey, these are some of the percentages of what people kind of lean towards. So you have the West Broadway at over 50%, Lowry about at 23%, and then your remaining folks either having another preference. A lot of you drill into those comments where I just need more information. So actually related to this one is need more information before sharing a preference. You also, the anti-LRT people also came out in that 9%. And so when we ask folks why they pick their top preference, often it was access to residents and businesses on the north side. For Lowry Avenue, a lot of folks cited the Upper Harbor Terminal, and maybe the idea that there was some options for wider roads or less impacts to folks. And kind of throughout the routes, it was the need to get to high density and maximize your ridership, as well as supporting those that have been historically underserved by transit. Most importantly, is like is anything missing? And we did hear two things. One was kind of, if you go directly north of West Broadway, there's 21st Street, and somebody put forth the proposal that could be a transit mall for a portion of that. And then also kind of this idea that if you are connecting to Lowry, is there another way besides the east side of Highway 94 getting to the west side? And so both 3rd Street, and we kind of already as a project team responded to Lyndale, but that did come up. I would say that for both of these, it was not like we heard overwhelming kind of pushes for either. It was just a kind of a couple individuals putting forth these ideas. And got a lot of questions too about why aren't we changing our northern end? And I think we've talked about that as a committee already. And of course, kind of one that we already kind of put out of that we didn't recommend for consideration was Highway 55 to Highway 100. We asked, kind of going to the project goals, about people rated them, but also we got 600 comments speaking specifically to the goals. And kind of the top 3 that came out were that access to transit, the advancing equity, and improving reliability. And here's I have a couple slide that just kind of gives an example of what people talked about. As you kind of notice, whether people are commenting on the route or the goals themselves, some of the themes are similar, right? We're hearing similar things. And so kind of focusing on anti-displacement early, focusing on improving the transit experience and making safe and clean and fast. And with that, that's kind of that kind of sums it up. And there's a lot more to get into it at the end of the packet. There's also provided just some kind of sample comments that we kind of have, and more of a report coming. But I think what's been really helpful for the project team is that you know, you start to feel like you've had a good amount of conversations when you hear some of the same major things coming out in multiple venues. And you know, you kind of keep, if new things are coming up, right, they need more discussion, but a lot of themes emerge throughout the ways we are engaging. So if it was at meetings, in the survey, people reaching out, whatnot, kind of coalescing. So turn it to the committee for any questions or discussion. Otherwise, I can turn it to Nick to kind of talk to us about next steps of how we're going to place stations in places that we don't have stations.
I got two parts if I can go quick. If Broadway is the overwhelming choice so far, when will be the timeline to fully choose it or not? And then once the route is chosen, will there be an opportunity to reopen the public commenting and put up some more literature about, hey, we've chosen the route, not just, hey, we're thinking about these routes. Hey, we chose this route. Now we want a different round or more specific comments versus theories of where they want it, or, you know, broad scope ideas.
Yeah, so, you know, I think while we're receiving, you know, we've been asking a lot, and like in July, we'll have more information about, you know, specifics. There's a couple of things specific to the process that I think are worth really highlighting. And it's kind of to the flow of this year. So we've talked about getting close or having a community supported alignment kind of by the end of 2021. And what we need to get to in the fall is having a draft report that kind of starts to outline, you know, so kind of hearing where folks are going is important, but we actually need to give more information. So the report having the evaluation, having place stations, having some basic engineering, and having a 45-day official comment period on that report kind of targeted for the fall. And then we'll take that back, and the draft report might not have a lot of recommendations, but kind of that sharing of information. And then we'll have a final report that will come out after that, kind of towards the end of the year. And that may include some recommendations of how to move forward for folks to comment on. But that doesn't end the conversation and the feedback, because part of our environmental work in the year that will follow will be about addressing some of those concerns that people are raising in the route selection, and kind of like officially saying, okay, this is what we've selected, this is what we're trying to move forward with, here is this full environmental evaluation for you to comment on. So, you know, I've heard a lot too about like this year feels really fast in terms of getting to a route, and it's really almost a couple year process. Because you're not a fully official until you've cleared your environmental review. So you're kind of narrowing down and getting more into it, but hope there'll be kind of almost 3 really official times to comment on our direction forward.
So Sophia, are you saying that the RFP work group will not know what the route is?
Correct. They will begin their work before a route is selected. And you know, I think we've had a lot of discussion among various groups about that. I think some folks have told us you need them way deep into their work, and other folks have said, why are you starting them before you select a route? So in a sense, we're trying to thread the needle between the two, get them on board, get them working concurrently with this. And, you know, the anti-displacement is, you know, really big conversation in terms of both, you know, it's construction support, it's direct displacement, it's indirect displacement, etc. And really getting those programs together ahead of time is really kind of some of the charge of that.
So what is their geographic area if we don't know the route? Are we going?
So it's the
It's the
Yeah.
whole corridor, Catherine, right? So when we look at, because not only do we have these issues occurring in Minneapolis, but there's some changes in Robbinsdale as well, right? So, and we want to make sure that as we look at Crystal as well, because the alignment has moved from the rail corridor to the middle of 81. So that also brings some changes. So in terms of what we're asking the consultant to do is take a look at the whole alignment. Now there will be, because we're also in different jurisdictions in the whole alignment, there might be areas that need some more support or more tool modification. Let's just call it that right now. Because, you know, one city might have some tools that another community doesn't. How can we make that consistent, and how can we make those tools kind of work? So in terms of the work of the anti-displacement contractor, they will be working for really supporting the whole corridor.
Right, but they won't be supporting Lowry, which will be impacted if Lowry is not selected, and all the way up to Dowling.
Right. So part of the work that the working group's going to do is sort of non-alignment specific, right? Especially if we're looking at certain supportive policies. If the alignment's on Lowry or West Broadway, we need those policies in place to support businesses, right? What we can do after an alignment is placed is then dig a little deeper and be more specific of how that can happen. But the general structure should be supportive. Whether it's Lowry or whether it's West Broadway, we know that there's going to be support that's needed in supporting businesses and residents. So how can we start doing that? And then when the alignment is identified, then we can dig a little bit deeper and really understand specifically. Some of that data needs to come in there. So, you know, although this work starts in September, really kind of what that work is allowing us is to bring that information together. And when the alignment is identified, then they can really begin to dig a little deeper in that.
So, I mean, are government officials, county, city, finding other resources to assist the businesses and residents outside of the corridor? Because they're going to be impacted. What is the plan, or who would I ask about this plan, or is there a plan?
There isn't a plan right now, Catherine, right? Like that's been the crux of this whole thing, is that there hasn't been a plan, and we acknowledge that is probably the number one weakness with the previous work that was done. So that is helping us with this conversation with the advisory committee. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I keep calling them an advisory committee. My apologies. The working group. I'm going to get that tattooed here pretty quickly so I can remember that. But their recommendation is saying, you know, we'll most likely, I can imagine this, if you can work with me on this, is that everybody needs to work together on this to make this happen and move the needle, right? Like that is the good. And here's where we can do that. Here is where we can, if we take policies and programs here and match it up with policies and programs here, maybe we're going to get where 1 + 1 begins to equal 3 instead of 2. And so we're all kind of rowing to that same destination together. So part of what we are going to be building, Catherine, through this is that commitment. We do need the commitment from all of our organizations to make this happen. It's big. I'm not going to lie, and I don't want to sugarcoat this for folks, is that there are going to be programs that we can probably see some benefits and some tweaks that, you know, really are going to make a difference, but there's going to be some larger policy issues that are going to take some time for us to get through and work together on.
Peggy Sue has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. I just had a question about just like kind of building off of Catherine's comments, and maybe kind of the solution to this sort of threading the needle is, can we start this anti-displacement, you know, group starting kind of from the end of the route, or I guess the, you know, the Brooklyn Park side of the route, right? So that some of that work in Minneapolis isn't happening. You know, maybe that's just a conversation once we get to that place of phasing, because I see both sides of it, right? Which is that for sure there's definitely like some policy things that are just going to have to go into place that are going to happen in Minneapolis, kind of regardless of whether it goes Lyndale or whether it goes West Broadway. But I do think like starting, you know, it's just so much work to do both routes. And I feel like I have a lot of concern that just overextends this working group to a place where the work is not as quality because they're trying to do it twice, or, you know, in the case of all those extra extensions, like 5 or 6 times, right? So can we start backwards and start in Brooklyn Park and in Robbinsdale and in Crystal, or, you know, along the route where the corridor is, you know, kind of confirmed, and then have them work their way towards Minneapolis? Because I just hate to have all of this work go into kind of that working group working on all of these potential routes, and especially on that big routes, when I feel like those deserve, you know, especially the West Broadway corridor, just deserves so much time and attention and care. And I hate for that to be done in a way that's not done as well because we're trying to do too much.
Right. It's a little bit of they're starting kind of beforehand and then getting into the specifics as we, and that'll help with into as they propose their work plan, thinking about some of that. I think that's a piece that we have to dive into more, because I think the project team has heard both folks saying to us, you almost you got to start answering these questions before you even select a route, right? And then you have folks saying, don't even start this working group until you have a route. And yeah, it's a tough one to that point. Exactly. Sam, I know if you want to, it looks like it's something you wanted to add.
No, I appreciate Peggy Sue's comment on that, right? And what I hear from that is like, let's make sure we're putting the resources where it's mostly needed and organize ourselves that way. So I appreciate that that thought and the creativity with that. So I love that. Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, I think I just have a lot of concern. I do agree there's going to be the pushback of like, we need to know the displacement effects before we select, you know, West Broadway or whatever. I think that work makes sense. You know, I think this is just a timing question with the consultant when they come on board, is what's the information we have to know to select a route? Let's only do that. And then, you know, select the route, right? Like, I just think that it's both like as complicated and not as complicated as it sounds. Like, you know, like, I think that there's just like, there's all of these voices of like someone else said on this call, like there are people who are saying like, we're not that worried, right? Like, we're not that worried, we want this. And I think, you know, let's be clear that light rail as a form of transportation is an economic development tool. This is not the greatest way to move people. Like, we know that this is not the greatest transit option. So I think this is a conversation that we haven't really had that much as this group, is like, if we really wanted the most effective transit method for the cheapest way with the least amount of impact, we would be doing BRT or we would be doing streetcar. But we're doing light rail, and that is because light rail is an economic development tool. And so I think that also should be part of this conversation, is like, this is a very expensive investment. And so it's going to come with a lot of negatives, and it's also going to come with a lot of positives. And so I think I don't know, that's just like threading the needle on that conversation is a really tough thing to have, especially here on the north side. And so I would just really love to like save all of the energy of that consultant to really do good work where it's going to actually be, where the line's actually going to be, right? Because light rail is an economic development tool, right? So like, we're going to start to see that change immediately as soon as you know, the routing gets announced. So
Peggy Sue, with that comment, you know, what I'm hearing too is what we look for is really having that in the proposals, having the contractors identify where they can best, you know, put their resources early on until some of that is known a little bit more. I mean, we know that there's tools within the council. So regardless which area, this is still going to be covered by the council within Hennepin County. Regardless which area, we still need to know what tools can be used. So, I mean, those are good starting points for us versus maybe starting right specifically at the city level. And maybe that eventually comes in even when we think about starting at the local community city level, that we start a little bit maybe on that north end until things are more known in area 3.
Yeah, I guess my other question is like, do we have to tell people when we select the route? Like, you know, can we give the working group a head start, right? Because of, I think what we'll see is a lot of land speculation. So, you know, how can we give them a head start? Is that within our power to say, you know, this is going to come out and it's going to not be public?
I hear that, but I think I would be fired and Sophia would be fired if we didn't do it. I mean, that goes against one of our principles about being transparent. I would say that that's, you know, to your point, folks know what the 2 options are right now, right? So maybe folks are already hedging their bets at this point in terms of that, right? Catherine's nodding her head on that. So, yeah, so I think I hear that, Peggy. So I understand of just being able to be protective of communities. I hear that in your comment.
I don't know the rules, so I'm literally just out here asking, like, can we keep it secret?
Go ahead, Jason.
I had one question, and then Peggy Sue, that sort of your comment made me think of something as well, which is like from a Robbinsdale perspective, which is where, you know, who I represent in the community we represent. It's, you know, from an actual footprint, the difference isn't quite as big from, you know, in Minneapolis and what's happening where light rail is going to be relative to like Robbinsdale. It's not moving that far, but it is a really big change for our community. And I think like if you look at resources that are available, if you just look at like the cohorts that are focused on area 3 relative to like what is a massive change in area 2, like we only have one cohort that is focused on Robbinsdale. I mean, there are others that are also focusing on Robbinsdale, but as a primary. So I guess it's just, I mean, I hear what you're saying as far as like the attention that you want for Minneapolis and the displacement things, but there is also, as far as Robbinsdale is concerned, this is a massive change to our community. And I know that there's a lot of feedback of people that would say, well, like, why is there so much attention for Minneapolis when this isn't like exactly what we thought we were getting on light rail? So I guess it's just something to think about. But my question is kind of around between the 2 options. It seems like in the feedback that you got from the surveys, at least at a high level, that it's more in support of West Broadway. And does that mean that if the decision is made to go down Lowry, does that mean that that's not community supported, even though, you know, because there was a larger percentage of people? Or like what goes into like how much of the surveys and the feedback relate into decisions? Like, do we have to go down West Broadway because that was got a better response in the surveys? Or like, how does that all work? I guess that's my question.
So, you know, think of it as kind of beginning the conversation is that, you know, and kind of how we asked about it in the survey, it is to start to get a pulse of what people might want, right? Like if we had put out these 2 options and everybody had immediately been drawn to one and it was like, why did you even think of that other one, right? It would have been an indicator of kind of the direction to go. And as we often have alternatives, right, you have people on both sides. And so this was kind of like a first glimpse of where kind of where people are landing. It's not a universal, it's not a statistically significant survey. Like if I can't verify that I have a true representative sample of everybody in the specific area. So it's an input. And, you know, the survey is one piece, kind of what we heard when we went to meetings and had conversations with people and what people focused on and asked about. That's part of the indication as well. We need to ask that question basically in a way again, but with more information. We need to ask it with our engineering. We need to ask it with our project evaluation. We need to ask it in terms of the trade-offs that will be involved in it, and continue to dive in. And so, you know, I've heard from a lot of folks that are kind of, you know, see results like this and say, well, West Broadway is a given. You all have already decided. And there might be a point, like as we're getting to the draft and final survey, where we're really seeing direction one way or the other, and we're kind of still doing our evaluation. But at this point, it is too early. I couldn't say with any level of confidence either way that it would go, or that you're anywhere close to being ready to make a decision on it. But it shows you what people are thinking about. And starts to take that pulse of how we might get to a community-supported alignment.
Yeah, everybody's got to remember we have a lot of work to do here. We're showing lines on a map right now, and in the next few months we're going to be rolling out some conceptual visualizations along each one of these corridors to show, you know, what does it look like to have light rail along this route, and so that there's going to be a lot more conversation coming out of that also, and even in the next segment here, just to talk about along those routes where stations, where can stations be located. So we have a lot of work to do on this.
We got a lot of questions for you, Nick.
I wouldn't expect anything else, Catherine.
Jason, if I might just add, as Nick gets into his presentation here, is that we are having that conversation of what does community supported alignment look like, right? There isn't a definition that says, if you get this, you will get this. So as Sophia said, it's the alignment that best meets the project principles and goals. And so that's why we talk about that. That's why we're asking for community feedback on that in terms of, if we had to pick the alignment, how do you want to measure that in terms of positive, impacts, and then also minimizing any of the kind of the negative things here? It truly is going to be grounded in community feedback and collaboration with the stakeholders, and needs to be supported, right, by the project corridor communities and decision makers. We're not. We cannot suggest an alignment that's not going to be supported by our community makers. That's not going to do us well in kind of the original conversation that we had about having to compete for the federal funds. The feds are not interested in supporting a project that is not meeting the community's desires and needs and supported by community. So as we get a little bit closer, and as Nick's talking a little bit more of the technical work that's going to come forward, that's going to help us in that decision making. And part of this is transparency. It's very much like the environmental process. You can go ahead and build a horrible project, right? The environmental process also doesn't allow you to not do that, right? It doesn't stop you. What it does is it says, how bad is it going to be? And it's to aid decision makers in making decisions. What we want to do is definitely come with the best possible project that is supported, that meets those goals, and ultimately is going to be competitive at the national level as well.
Can we have a quick question to Sophia before Nick starts? Sophia, you showed 36% on one of your slides of resident responding on other routes. Was that one other route or multiple other routes?
You mean this slide?
Yeah, the 13.48.
So it was more asked of, I need more information before sharing a preference.
Okay.
And so this was more folks saying, like, hey, which one do you want to be advanced, and basically not being ready to have an opinion. It was a way for us to capture allowing people to respond, but about not forcing them to select one of the two options,
Mhm.
but still kind of indicating support for the idea. Where the other bucket was kind of like, what else would you see? I would say a lot of this 9% were where we heard from the folks that don't like LRT at all. So that kind of came out as well. The places that we actually got the most feedback on other routes, and where I got to kind of this slide, it was people deciding to not necessarily respond to the survey, but email maps and details of what they were thinking about. You heard a little bit of it in terms of, can you do something on Lyndale still for the Lowry? But I would say overall, it was in terms of people suggesting alternatives to Lowry or West Broadway. We definitely got some strong comments, especially the person that suggested this one has really been talking to fellow, the Transit Mall on 21st has been talking to folks in the area to kind of gain support and whatnot. But only I'm losing my words, but for the most part, people validated the two options. And it was just a few comments kind of saying, can you also consider these things?
Okay, thanks. It's time to roast Nick.
Well, good thing they took my time away, so we only have a few minutes to roast me, Catherine. So I guess this discussion is kind of as we've rolled out our route options in March, and we've had the discussions, and we've had the interactive map up, and we're getting survey information and comments back in along the alignments. It's time to start taking a look at stations and station placement as we go forward. So this is kind of to move us into in the next month or so. We will, as we look at the routes and we look at more information on how alignments fit within those routes, and this is to talk about and discuss, how we go about identifying potential station locations around these routes, and we'll start locating those in there. But the feedback that we're getting now is very helpful to inform us of where we need to look at. So just to kind of start a little bit here, this is the map showing the previous alignment in gold there, just so you can see ghosted in some of the stations that have been affected by this route mitigation. And so right now, the up in segment 1, we have our route still intact because it's not affected by the freight rail and BNSF. So we have 4 stations in there, and we're very confident that those stations are in the right place. We've done a lot of work and the design is at 90% on that alignment and those stations. But as we start getting a little bit farther south, so there's 7 stations here as we get south of that area in segment or area 2 and area 3 that are really affected by this route, this alignment mitigation. And so that's the Van White Station, Penn Avenue Station, Theodore Worth Park, Plymouth Avenue Station, Golden Valley Road and up in Golden Valley, and then as we get up into Robbinsdale, 42nd Avenue, Bass Lake Road up in Crystal, and 63rd Avenue Station, which the Bass Lake Road and 63rd are directly adjacent to the freight rail where we were before. So as we're looking at this, we're recommending to continue the stations that are up in that area 1. We're also recommending to continue with stations at 63rd and Bass Lake Road because they're very close, basically directly adjacent to where we were before. But as we get down into Robbinsdale, we have some different options, but it seems very very intuitive to us that a station downtown would make sense that serves that Robbinsdale core business area. But this is also an opportunity where as we're looking at County Road 81 as a route option, that North Memorial becomes a destination here that we weren't able to serve before. So that's a good location to evaluate and look at a station in there. So net in downtown and in North Memorial for Robbinsdale. It's where we get into Minneapolis, where with the 2 route options that our destinations and determination becomes a little bit more varied. So that's where the input that we're getting in our community meetings and from our surveys are really coming in to help us. So next slide, please. So this graphic here just are again, it's not statistically significant as Sophia would say, but this is what we're coming from our interactive map and comments that we're getting from the community to show, you know, these would be good areas for stations. So the bigger the circle you see on the map, there was more desire at that location, or more indication that this is where the community would like to see it based on the folks that responded to that. But it's also helpful as we're getting the information coming from those surveys and from that interactive map, that we're going to start hearing what are the destinations out there. You know, where are the businesses, the employments, the grocery stores, the schools, the places of worship out there where people are generating their trips to and from. So those will help us with their determination. But this map really starts, as you look at it, grouping together locations or areas where it'd be good candidates for stations.
Nick, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, Catherine.
All right, and this goes back to map 46, and maybe it's somewhere that I don't have, but I don't know the names of the roads that are in navy, green, pink, or red. All of a sudden, I leave Target Field and I'm at Osa Memorial. How did I get there?
Yeah, and those are the links, and like I think we brought up before, that those links are, you know, they're following general alignments, but you know, as we go to West Broadway or we go to Washington Lowry, those links are really going to be, you know, there's six links in there, but you know, our final consideration could be a combination of any of those, or you know, maybe a hybrid of some of these, but they're just general locations or general alignments or routes that can get us to the routes, you know, the West Broadway.
Do they have street names? I mean, all of a sudden I'm looking at it from Target Field, North Fifth. Okay, that's my baseline. Is that where we're talking about leaving from Target Field?
Yeah, Target Field's down on the bottom with at there, and then
okay.
As we're coming off of Target Field, you know, the blue goes up through.
What is the blue? What street is that?
It's 7th. That's 7th Street going up through there.
Okay, can we have some names on there?
Yeah, it is. It's on there. These maps are really small, and they're really meant to just kind of show general locations, Catherine.
Okay, I got you. All right, because I would.
And some of these routes are following right-of-ways or maybe off-road or a combination of routes. Catherine.
Okay, because we all start talking in this group at Van White. That's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Are we going to be talking about these routes directly coming out of Target Field?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as we're moving forward here, we're getting the input and comments from community and from these groups. The selection considerations that we're going to have are, you know, the input that we're getting, and that input's going to be, what are the key destinations in the community? What are our transit connections? You know, we're going to make sure that we build those robust transit connections in there. We obviously look at population density. You know, we don't want to just put a station where there's nobody there, or, you know, no development there. We're going to look at, you know, what's the available right of way, because these stations do take up some room. You know, they're 300 feet long. They take up a block. You know, they're very wide in these areas. And then, you know, we really want to pay attention. I think it was mentioned before that light rail is really an opportunity that presents development opportunities. And so we want to look at what the existing and the future development is out there, you know, the existing and planned development along these routes to help with siting stations. And just a general rule of thumb to bring up, you know, typically a light rail station, we're not stopping every block because we want it to be efficient, but the typical spacing is about a half a mile to a mile. But we base that on demand, and you know, if we need a station a little bit closer and it makes sense, we'll move it a little closer. And if we need to space it out that full mile, you know, we can do that. So we're flexible as we're doing the evaluation. Next slide, please. So as we're planning these stations, you know, this graphic's just to say that, you know, that little that gray bar in the middle of the circle is the platform itself. That's the station that we're physically putting in alignment. But then we'll take a look at the site around that station and how we access the station and what's being impacted by it. But our station area planning that's going to happen along with the project would be that a half-mile radius typically to look at around that station and how things develop around there and how we guide people to stations and get people to destinations. So we're looking at a big area. So some of the station elements, as we're taking a look at and placing these, we want to make sure that we have good pedestrian access. We have bike facilities, so people, if they want to park their bike and get on the train, they can. We want to make sure that there's wayfinding to get to these stations. We'll look at landscaping around the stations and around that area. We'll look at how we get bus facilities to incorporate where those stops are, passenger pickups and drop-offs. If there's a park and ride that's necessary in the area, we'll look at the placement of that, and other things like stormwater best management practices and how we handle that. So the next slide will show this a little bit more. This is more in depth. This is up in Brooklyn Park along West Broadway there. These are some of the stations that are in the previous plan that are in our project now. And what this map shows is as we start looking at pedestrian access to these stations on either end, how do we make that robust and safe and accommodated to folks to get to the station or across the street. We're looking at, you can see on the left end, there's on either side of the road, there's the bus stops with the red T or the T in the red circle, where we would place those bus stops. As you start looking around the map and some of those dashed rectangles, we look at where potential passenger drop-offs could be in these areas and what other facilities that are available. So we take this is when we get more into engineering how we look at things, but we need to start thinking about this as we start siting these stations, and then we'll get into this kind of detail as we get farther into engineering. So this
Nick,
is more to come.
Can I ask another question, Nick?
Yeah, Catherine.
Okay. In our previous alignment, Van White had what I consider to be a dangerous elevation and drop off. Is that still in the plan?
I guess I'm not sure about that. The dangerous elevation and drop off. Our platforms are 14 inches high to accommodate the vehicles in there, but that goes down to the track. We make sure that we meet ADA to get access to the station on either side, and that we have safe pedestrian access. If we try to get the access at an intersection with signalized intersections, so there's ped buttons and recalls and lights, and we stop traffic. If we need to look at inner mid-block crossings, as what we call them, where there's not an intersection, we make sure that there's adequate pedestrian crossings there with crosswalks and signals and flashers or a full signal to stop cars so pedestrians can get across.
So you're saying that Van White will no longer be elevated? Is that correct?
Well, right now in the current plans, Van White would not be a destination through here.
Okay.
Yeah, it shows up on the map, Catherine, because it's like the previous location. So all the other stuff is what we're looking at moving forward, and there's a couple of stations from the old plan that are in that section.
Yeah, we're just kind of showing those as stations that were impacted by the reroute, Catherine.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I guess the next step as we're going through it in July and August is we want to bring forward concept sections of how the alignment would fit within these corridors, and then again bring back these preliminary general station locations that based on input that we're getting and based on work that we're doing with the cities and with the county and the whole community. So I will cut it off there.
Questions or discussion for Nick?
Question: What ultimately ends up happening with Golden Valley? The whole community getting left out. Are they still part of the discussion process?
Yeah, they're still part of our corridor management committee. They still have a seat on there. there is a commitment that we've worked with them on the project, and there's things that we've worked on, some mitigations and the previous alignment that we're working with the city to identify ways that maybe we can continue with those commitments and help them out, whether it's outside the project, but we bring in the appropriate partners. So they're still involved.
Question for you, Nick.
Yeah.
When you do these concept drawings, I assume, right? Is that what we're gonna be looking at here in the coming months?
Yes.
Platforms. Are you gonna give multiple renditions or artist renditions of different styles of platforms and at grade versus raised, or are we sticking? What are we expecting to look at?
We will have a bunch of different options. We have a graphic or graphics that are starting to come together that give a few different options, and we'll have some perspectives because we're getting a lot of questions. What does it look like if we have a structure and elevation? We will pull those together so people can visualize what those impacts are, because just because we raise it up off a road grade doesn't mean there's no impacts. So
yes. The one thing I keep hearing is if we do put it up in the air, what will the business's connection to that platform be if it's raised? Is there a way to address that in some of the concept drawings a little bit, just so we have at least a platform to talk about it?
I think we eventually can pull something together like that. These will be works in progress. That we're doing some digital graphics based on existing photographs or renderings that are typical along the corridor, and we can modify those to answer questions and visualize what a concept could look like.
Thank you. Super excited. Thank you.
So Nick, you're the engineer. With the options that we have in front of us, what do you see as the biggest engineering challenge for you? This is kind of a generic question, but I mean,
yeah,
this is a change. We're going possibly going one of those two routes. What do you see as the larger engineering challenges?
Well, Catherine, as an engineer, we can build anything, but what we really need to pay attention. The challenge is going to be is to make sure that it's within context of the community. We really do want to limit our negative impacts and our disruptions to the community. So that's really where we're spending a lot of time focusing on that and safety. I mean, that's number one. We want to make sure that this system is efficient, but it's also safe for our riders, safe for the community. So those are probably the two biggest challenges.
Okay.
Do we have other questions for Nick, or are we ready to move on? We're getting close to the end of our agenda. So I guess in the meantime, did anyone want to revisit the conversation earlier about anti-displacement? Is there anything new that we want to share or have a conversation about?
This is Corey. I'm wondering, to circle back on the topic of not being able to prioritize a local consultant in the whole picture, given the framework of needing federal or wanting to use federal funds for this. Could it be possible to add a bullet point or something in the draft that addresses the need to, I don't know how to necessarily word this, but research and review previous issues related to other projects of similar structure, such as the Green Line going through, into St. Paul, and some of the challenges they're having in the Blue Line or the Southwest Rail, etc. to just add a bullet point that they make sure they touch on those to get the information from the community of what displacements happened in those other areas.
Great, thank you for that. And I was just looking at one bullet that we do have on there about that case study review, and we can be more specific. Right now, we say that we want to see 3 to 5 examples of successful anti-displacement programs in kind of comparable U.S. cities. You know, maybe part of what we add on that is that analysis of what was successful with the Green Line, the Central Corridor, and what were some of the challenges as well. So maybe we add that as that policy audit piece and specifically call out those local examples. Thank you for that. That's a great suggestion.
So I think just to wrap up for this conversation around the anti-displacement piece, my feedback, and if Felipe is on the call, as far as the CMC, and I'm just making a couple of notes, but and so Sophia, if you want to help me here, but or even Sam, but to me, the big themes that we talked about were around consideration of, you know, is this a local resource? I know we can't say that like it can only be local, but the preference of it being a local resource and, you know, a consultant that would manage the working group. The other big one was around timing, as far as like we need something sooner, you know, just given the timelines that we have of when the line is going to be announced, when the RFP is going to go out, that we need action in the area of anti-displacement sooner than later, and at the very least, like a resource for the community to engage prior to, and maybe in tandem with, whoever this consultant is. And then I mean, those were like the really 2 big ones that jumped out at me. Is there anything else that I'm missing or that we need to make sure we bring up to the CMC? It was just basically just saying, here's where, you know, this is the CAC's perspective, and you need to make sure you take it into account as you make these decisions as the bigger CMC.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, Jason, if I can add, and this is, I think, the point that Peggy Sue was sharing with us, and then kind of how you also brought in the perspective of Robbinsdale, is just ensuring that the proposals that we receive are putting sort of the best effort early on that's really complementing the technical work, right? So if we need to stay a little high level because we just don't have certain information pieces that's going to help us dig a little deeper, that's okay. So, you know, really structuring their proposal in the work that makes sense and complements the technical work and the work of the communities as we receive that feedback. And then I would just also say that Corey's last comment too is very well taken about making sure we have that really good assessment of our local experience built in, that's brought into the conversation, and then just also maybe confirming that CAC will have a representative as part of that evaluation panel.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
We also want to make sure that this firm gets paid enough so they can pay the residents for their input.
Okay.
But we're not doing it.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
agree with Catherine. There needs to be some degree of funding in there, not necessarily, you know, I think it can be creatively right, but, you know, making sure that if we're going to engage with residents and take a lot of their time, that whether that's gift cards or, you know, whatever that looks like, it'd be nice to make sure that, you know, we're compensating people for their time.
Yep. That sounds like something the CMC should know about if they weren't thinking about it previously. So that all makes sense. So I'll make sure, I mean, I know that this is being recorded, so we can go back and make sure we've got those locked in, but I promise to the group here that I'm gonna represent those things we just reviewed. If anything else pops up that I forgot that we already talked about, just we'll go through this recording and I'll make sure that comes up as well. So that kind of
one other
oh,
thing,
go
Jason.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
I just thought about it. I'm not sure if Nicole is on this call, but funding or some way of compensating the community that's already been impacted by the coming project. So I know that Harrison has been impacted already by this project, even though the route has changed. So making sure that the council and others know that there are areas that have already been impacted and whether or not there's going to be some type of remediation for that group. I mentioned it at I think a CMC meeting before, but just as a reminder.
Sure. I mean, I can definitely bring it up. I don't know that it's not necessarily in the context of this anti-displacement conversation.
They've already been displaced.
So, okay, so maybe it is. I'll work with the project team on
you guys talk among yourselves. Mhm.
Yeah, but we can definitely make sure that the CMC is aware of it. So then that kind of leads me. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Jason, I was just going to speak to kind of Catherine's point. You know, part of this work is something that we've talked about what happens to those previous commitments that were made with the original alignment, and kind of where does that go? And so that is something that we do see that's embedded in some of this work. You know, to Catherine's point, we've heard from Harrison. You know, there were safety improvements, there were, you know, infrastructure improvements as part of the original project. How can we still meet those investments going forward? So that is something that we see that this working group would be addressing for sure.
And I mention it because we are, as the gentleman talked about, we are looking to assist Golden Valley, who are probably going to be left out of this new alignment, and there's ways to assist them. Harrison is also impacted, so let's put them on that list as well.
So yeah, so maybe just in the context of the for the yeah, I mean, just making sure that the previous plans, you know, that the commitments that we've made, how do we best uphold those, or you know, how does the team best uphold that? Okay, so the other big piece that we wanted to talk about before we kind of wrap things up, and we're going to be done well in advance, it seems like, of our allotted time for this evening, but looking to maybe schedule, I know it came up in the last conversation of some people were interested in meeting in person and having a little bit more of a meet and greet. And so, you know, obviously you don't need to feel obligated, but as maybe just another chance to get to know one another and meet in person, having a meet and greet in an outdoor space on the 16th. And I guess just wanted to get feedback from people in the group here. When do we, or where do we want to have this? So in working with Sophia, we kind of thought that the three options just near the corridor would be, there's Becker Park in Crystal, which is brand new. There is there's like a nice shed in Robbinsdale at Lakeview Terrace Park. And then I think there's also some covered areas in North Commons, which is kind of over by the YMCA off of West Broadway in North Minneapolis. And so I don't know if we want to like do a raise of hands or how we want to come to consensus. I think maybe let's try to use some of our reactions, and by the reactions we can kind of get a sense of which one is getting the most response. And then if we can't determine because it's not working or people are having trouble, then we'll just maybe send an email as a way of like backing that up. Does that make sense,
Yeah.
everyone?
And just to clarify quick, Jason, is it so I think people saw the slide. So our next official kind of meeting would be July 14th at 6 at 6. So that would be our next regular scheduled kind of meeting. As we kind of solicited, like, would people like to have an extra meeting? The response was kind of mixed. So some folks, really can't commit more time, or they have really booked up schedules. So the idea of like a meet and greet for people to actually kind of meet each other, everybody's kind of virtual screens, and the proposed date was Wednesday, June 16th. So basically 2 weeks from now, on kind of a Wednesday, it seems like most people, that was a day that was free. So it's kind of a suggestion of are folks interested, and of these options, what's maybe most convenient for people to meet if they have any preferences.
So is the question, do you want to meet, or is the question, which one of those locations do you want to meet at?
Yeah, kind of thumbs up on the idea and where to go.
So do people want to meet in person? I guess let's start there. If no one shows a thumbs up, then then maybe we don't do it. But we've got a couple of thumbs ups, so we'll start there.
I think the idea for a June 16th would really just be like, the project staff's not going to bring a super formal agenda. It'll be just time to get to know each other and talk about project stuff. And Jason, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but that's kind of the idea, just coalesce as a team building, in a sense, coalesce as a committee, since we've been so virtual with each other.
Correct. With a little bit less pressure than like being the official meeting, which we need to have once a month. Was the thought anyway.
Here's the dates on the screen for anybody. So kind of the meet and greet, and then the next regular meeting.
So it didn't seem like there was an overwhelming response of meeting in person. I don't know, Sophia, do you still think we should just like do it, and then whoever shows up can, we'll send out the details, or do you think we should pass as a group? Do we have any thumbs up for not having an in-person meeting?
I think we got no reply to that, and a couple thumbs for the in-person. So, it'll be super informal, if that's the way to go. And we try to maybe get midline kind of thing. I don't know, any reactions would be welcome.
Yeah.
At least once should be our goal. So if it doesn't take place in June, really start thinking about for July. I know we start getting into our vacations in August and everything else, but I don't think we have to rush this one. I think we can say, let's get through June, let's reestablish our normal world again, and then come back in July with that conversation.
Or maybe we can meet when the work group is engaged.
Well, that might be a while before that.
That's
going to be after July.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
September. Yeah.
So September, Catherine. So just wanted to clarify that might happen kind of closer into the fall, which is fine. But it sounds like Brett's suggestion is kind of let folks maybe get used to having a lifestyle that resembles a little bit of pre-pandemic, and then maybe hold off until July.
I think that's totally reasonable. And it's not urgent. This is, again, it's more of just connecting as a group and having other opportunities. So, and that's actually a great point, Brett. So I think let's table this for now, and we'll revisit in July after, Minneapolis just you know, we just are taking masks off right now in St. Paul and Minneapolis. So let's get used to this new environment and feel comfortable with that. And then we'll do it in July. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that, Brett.
These meetings in person, or is that not happening anytime soon?
I think that's open for consideration. Our July 14th meeting, there is going to be a lot of technical stuff and kind of role plotty. In the last poll of the committee, I think everybody is, to what Jason just said, in the transitional phase. You have a few folks that are like, yes, in person, let's do it. And a few folks that are like, anyway, a few more months. You kind of like, some folks are just seeing their families, right, for the first time in person in a year. So to come to a committee is like, what? Where others have been meeting in person for, you know, a while. So there's kind of a little bit of a balance. So we kind of asked last time, like, hey, do we want to do July as in person? It was kind of like, maybe try virtually again. But definitely kind of the desire to have in person at some point. And maybe not even every meeting, but occasionally is kind of the feedback from the committee.
And, you know, as one of the co-chairs, just my thought on is that I would rather have an in-person meeting be something more informal, so people don't feel like there's this, you know, the overarching obligation in case they're not comfortable. So have it be a little bit more of a optional. And then, so, you know, maybe like if things go well in July with a meet and greet and people feel comfortable and things are getting back to normal, then in August, maybe having an in-person meeting, or September, I think seems like really reasonable. It's not, I mean, these are effective meetings. We're having conversations. So, you know,
So
Sophia's
Jason,
point.
do you see the entire CAC going out and touring West Broadway together as a group, or Lowry, or both?
That would be a great thing to do.
Yeah,
we haven't discussed it, but that would be a good idea.
I want to see who we're impacting or potentially impacting.
You can follow up with that, Catherine. We'll talk to our co-chairs and kind of look at the schedule and talk a little bit about the logistic options that we have to host something like that. Okay. It might be a similar vein, right? That if folks are more comfortable getting together later in the summer or early fall, targeting that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll only do it if there's a blue line notebook that I get to take notes in as we go through the corridor.
We'll see what we can do. But
no, that's a great...
sorry, Jason, I would just also say that maybe July or sort of post-July makes sense to do that, because we'll be coming out with potential station locations, and that might, you know, the two of those two things can come together. So folks could see where potential station locations could be on that tour.
So we received the follow-up. Okay.
All right. Well, I think we're good for tonight. I really appreciate everyone staying past our normal time and the conversation that we had. I've got my feedback for the CMC, and you know, thanks everybody for the work that we're doing and trying to represent our communities.
Thank you all. Thank you for spending the time with us tonight.
All right. Bye.